The air inside Westview Medical Center was sharp with the familiar scent of antiseptics and fresh paint. Maya Daniels stood in the hospital lobby, clutching her new ID badge, her heart thumping with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had worked tirelessly to get here, late nights in nursing school, grueling shifts at understaffed hospitals, and years of sacrifice. Westview was a prestigious hospital, known for its state-of-the-art facilities and high standards, and she was ready to make her mark. Maya adjusted her freshly pressed uniform and took a deep breath, steeling herself. Today was the start of a new chapter, one that she hoped would lead to personal and professional fulfillment. As she walked toward the nurses' station, the bustling activity around her momentarily faded. She couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. She had earned this, every bit of it. When she reached the nurses' station, the buzz of conversation dimmed slightly. A group of nurses glanced at her, their smiles polite but tight, eyes flickering with curiosity that quickly faded into something less welcoming. Jessica, a blonde nurse with striking blue eyes, looked Maya up and down, then offered a brief, practiced smile. "You must be the new nurse," Jessica said, her tone polite but cool. "I'm Jessica. You'll find that we have very high standards here at Westview." Maya returned the smile, refusing to let the distant reception dampen her spirits. "Yes, I'm Maya Daniels. I'm looking forward to meeting everyone and getting started." Jessica nodded, her gaze lingering a second longer before she turned to address a group of nurses. They resumed their conversation in hushed voices, occasionally glancing in Maya's direction. Maya took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of isolation already pressing down on her. She knew she'd be the only black nurse on the floor, but she hadn't expected it to feel so conspicuous. Maya quickly found her way to the head nurse's office. She knocked softly, and the door opened to reveal Catherine Lutz, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression. Her gaze was direct, assessing. "Ms. Daniels, I presume?" Catherine said, barely giving Maya a chance to nod before she stepped aside. "Come in, we have a lot to cover, and I hope you're prepared to keep up." "Yes, ma'am," Maya replied, determined to make a good impression. As Catherine led her through a brief orientation, Maya was attentive, asking questions and taking notes. But there was an edge to Catherine's tone, a coldness that Maya couldn't shake. She felt as though every question she asked was a test, every response carefully scrutinized. She reminded herself that first days were always tough, especially in a place with high standards like Westview. The rest of her day was a whirlwind of introductions, orientations, and paperwork. She met a few doctors and nurses, but each interaction left her feeling a step behind. Conversations would dwindle when she approached, and her attempts at small talk were met with polite but distant replies. By the time her shift ended, Maya was mentally and emotionally drained. She gathered her things, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. She just wanted to head home and shake off the feeling of being an outsider in a place she dreamed of working. As she made her way to the exit, she overheard two nurses talking in low voices around the corner. "Did you see the new hire?" one whispered. "Yeah," the other replied, her tone skeptical, not sure what they were thinking. "This isn't exactly the right environment." Maya froze, the words cutting through her like a knife. She felt the sting of their judgment, the unspoken words that said so much more than the ones they dared to voice. The hopeful excitement she'd felt that morning was replaced with a gnawing sense of doubt and isolation. She'd known coming here wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't expected to feel so unwelcome so quickly. Trying to hold herself together, Maya stepped outside and made her way to the bus stop. As she sat on the cold bench, she pulled out her phone and dialed her mother's number. After a couple of rings, the familiar warmth of her mother's voice filled her ears. "Hey, baby girl, how was your first day?" The tears she'd been holding back prickled at the corners of her eyes. But Maya forced herself to keep her voice steady. "It was challenging, Mama. Not exactly what I expected." There was a pause on the other end. Then her mother's voice softened, laced with understanding. "Maya, you listen to me. You've worked hard to get where you are, and nobody can take that away from you. Remember who you are and where you come from. You're strong, baby, stronger than they'll ever know." Maya closed her eyes, letting her mother's words wash over her, filling her with the strength she so desperately needed. She thought of her grandmother, who had marched in the civil rights movement, and her father, who had built a business from the ground up despite countless obstacles. She came from a line of fighters. She wouldn't let this break her. I know, Mama, she said, her voice thick with emotion. It's just hard. Nothing worth doing is ever easy. Maya, remember that. You keep your head up. Do your job better than anyone else. And don't you dare let them see you falter. You hear me? Maya nodded, even though her mother couldn't see her. Yes, ma'am, I hear you. As she ended the call, she noticed a sleek black car slow down as it passed the bus stop. Through the tinted windows, she caught a glimpse of a man with salt and pepper hair. His gaze fixed on her. Their eyes met for a split second before the car sped away, leaving her with an odd sense of unease. Determined not to let her doubts get the best of her, Maya squared her shoulders, her mother's words echoing in her mind. She was here to do a job, and she was going to prove that she belonged at Westview, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As the bus approached, Maya stood and took a deep breath. Tomorrow would be a new day, and she was ready to face it head on, come what may. Little did she know, her presence at Westview was about to set in motion a series of events that would challenge the very foundation of the hospital's culture, exposing hidden prejudices and forcing a reckoning that was long overdue. The following day, Maya arrived at Westview Medical Center with renewed determination. She had spent the evening mentally preparing herself, reminding herself why she'd worked so hard to get here. This was her dream job, and she wasn't going to let anyone's prejudice take it away from her. She started her shift by heading to the nurses' station to pick up her assignments. Today, her supervisor, Catherine Lutz, handed her a file with a tight smile. These are your patients for the day, Catherine said, her tone brisk. We have a couple of challenging cases on the roster. I trust you're ready? Maya nodded. Of course, I'm here to help however I can. Catherine's eyes lingered on her, a faint glint of skepticism in her gaze. Good, just make sure you're thorough. We don't want any mistakes. Maya bit back a retort, reminding herself to stay professional. She glanced at the list, noting that her assignments were particularly complex, more so than what she'd observed her colleagues handling yesterday. A few patients were high risk, requiring constant monitoring, while others had complicated care plans that would demand extra time and attention. It didn't take long for Maya to realize that she was being tested, perhaps even set up to fail. But rather than letting it discourage her, she viewed it as an opportunity. She would prove herself, not just for her own sake, but to make it clear that she belonged here. As she moved through the ward, checking on each patient, she noticed a faint hum of conversation around her. Nurses and doctors passed by, their voices dropping to murmurs whenever she approached. It was as though the very air around her had thickened with suspicion and judgment. One of her patients, Mrs. Albright, a woman in her late 70s recovering from surgery, seemed especially apprehensive when Maya walked in. Good morning, Mrs. Albright. Maya greeted her warmly, checking the chart and then smiling. I'm Nurse Daniels, and I'll be looking after you today. How are you feeling? Mrs. Albright's eyes flicked over Maya, and she tightened her grip on her blanket. They said I'd have Nurse Jessica today, she said, her tone cold. Maya kept her composure. Jessica's been assigned to other patients, but I'm here to take care of you. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to let me know. The woman muttered something under her breath, and Maya caught the words, not what I expected, as she turned away. Ignoring the sting of Mrs. Albright's subtle rejection, Maya focused on her task, making sure that every detail of Mrs. Albright's care was executed with the highest standard. As the day wore on, Maya handled each of her complex cases with skill and patience. She was exhausted by midday, but the quiet sense of accomplishment kept her going. She was doing her job, and she was doing it well. Just before her lunch break, she heard her name being called from down the hallway. She turned to see Dr. Richard Carlson, the senior physician she'd heard about, striding towards her with a stern expression. He was tall, with graying hair and a commanding presence that seemed to fill the entire hallway. Nurse Daniels, he said, stopping just in front of her and crossing his arms. I was reviewing your notes on Mr. Levine, the patient in 308. You administered his pain medication an hour ago? Yes, Dr. Carlson, Maya replied, her tone professional. He reported a high level of pain, so I followed the prescribed dosage listed in his chart. Dr. Carlson raised an eyebrow, looking her over with barely veiled disdain. Well, I don't know where you trained, but here at Westview, we prioritize patient safety above all else. I expect my nurses to exercise discretion. Overmedicating a patient can be as harmful as undermedicating, don't you think? Maya felt a flicker of anger rise within her. She had followed protocol exactly. And she knew she had administered the correct amount. She met his gaze steadily. I understand, Dr. Carlson. I assure you, I administered the medication as listed in the chart. Patient safety is always my top priority. Dr. Carlson's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, there was a tense silence between them. Then he smirked, a look that sent a chill down her spine. Good, let's hope you can keep up. We have high standards here. Without another word, he turned and strode down the hall, leaving Maya standing there, her hands clenched. She knew what had just happened. She had been undermined, subtly accused of incompetence, and made to feel small in front of the other staff members who had overheard the exchange. It was exhausting, facing these small, subtle slights that eroded her confidence bit by bit. But she reminded herself of her mother's words. Keep your head high. Do your job better than anyone else. And don't let them see you falter. That afternoon, Maya took her lunch break in the hospital's small, sunlit courtyard. She was sitting alone, taking deep breaths and trying to shake off the stress of the morning. When a shadow fell across her table, she looked up to see a tall, distinguished-looking man with graying hair and a warm smile. He was dressed in a designer suit, not a doctor's coat, and his presence radiated an air of quiet authority. Mind if I join you? He asked, his tone friendly. Not at all, Maya replied, surprised but grateful for the company. As he sat down, he extended a hand. I'm Thomas Yates, here on a business visit, but I thought I'd get some fresh air before diving back into meetings. Maya shook his hand, introducing herself, though she kept her answers polite and brief. Still feeling guarded. Are you new here? He asked, his tone casual, though his eyes were sharp and observant. Yes, just started yesterday, Maya replied, trying to keep the weariness out of her voice. Thomas nodded, leaning back in his chair. I see. It can be tough, I imagine, adjusting to a new place. Westview has its own, unique environment. Maya smiled wryly. That's one way to put it. He chuckled, clearly sensing her discomfort. Well, if it's any consolation, I've been around enough hospitals to know that first impressions aren't always accurate. Sometimes it takes time for people to see what you bring to the table. Maya looked at him, feeling a flicker of hope. There was something about Thomas Yates that made her feel at ease. As if he understood the unspoken challenges she was facing. Thank you, Mr. Yates, she said. That means a lot. I've been trying to focus on doing my best. He nodded thoughtfully. You know, Maya, sometimes doing your best isn't just about performing well. It's about standing up when things aren't right. It takes courage to bring change, especially in places where people are comfortable with the way things are. Maya felt a shiver run down her spine. It was as if he knew exactly what she was going through, even though she hadn't shared any details. I'll keep that in mind, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. With a final nod, Thomas stood up. Well, I'd better get back. Good luck, Nurse Daniels. I have a feeling you're going to do great things here. As she watched him walk away, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't know why Thomas Yates had chosen to speak to her, or why his words had felt so significant. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going to give up. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was determined to face them head-on. Little did she know that Thomas Yates was far more than a visitor. And his presence at Westview would soon play a pivotal role in the unfolding events that would challenge everything Maya thought she knew about her place in the hospital. Maya returned to work the next day, her resolve steeled by her conversation with Thomas Yates. She didn't know much about him, but his words had given her the strength to push through the subtle hostility that seemed to cling to her every step at Westview. Whatever the intentions of her colleagues or superiors, Maya was determined to rise above. As she approached the nurse's station, Dr. Richard Carlson was waiting for her. His expression was carefully neutral, though Maya sensed an edge of disapproval. Nurse Daniels, he said, without a hint of warmth. I trust you're ready for another challenging day? Yes, Dr. Carlson, Maya replied, meeting his gaze with a calmness that belied the tension in her chest. He handed her a stack of patient charts. More than she had anticipated, and certainly more than her colleagues had been given. She glanced at the names and noted that each case was as complex as yesterday's. It was clear he was testing her, pushing her boundaries. perhaps hoping to see her falter. Some of these patients are particularly difficult, Dr. Carlson added, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Let's see if you can handle it. Maya nodded, refusing to let his words get under her skin. I'll get started right away. As she walked away, she could feel the weight of his gaze on her back. Maya knew that Dr. Carlson was waiting for her to make a mistake, to prove that she didn't belong here. But she was ready to show him, and everyone else, that she was more than capable. Her first patient of the day was Mr. Collins, a man in his 60s recovering from surgery with a complex post-op plan. As she entered his room, she was met with a scowl. Another new nurse? He grumbled, crossing his arms over his chest. Where's the nurse from yesterday? She's been assigned to other patients. Mr. Collins, I'll be taking care of you today, Maya replied, maintaining her professionalism. He sighed, clearly unhappy with the change. I don't like change, he muttered, as if she weren't standing right there. You new nurses think you know everything. Maya gave him a reassuring smile. I understand, Mr. Collins. I'll make sure you're well taken care of. Let's get started on your vitals. And if there's anything you need, just let me know. Despite his grumbling, Maya carried out her tasks efficiently, explaining each step to keep him informed and comfortable. As she finished up, Mr. Collins' expression softened, if only slightly. All right, he said grudgingly. You seem to know what you're doing. Thank you, Mr. Collins, Maya replied with a gentle smile, hiding the satisfaction she felt. Each small victory helped strengthen her resolve. Later that day, Maya was assigned to Mrs. Green, an elderly woman who was known for being particularly challenging. As she entered the room, she could feel the patient's icy stare. They sent you, huh? Mrs. Green said, her voice dripping with disdain. I'm not used to, well, never mind. Maya's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. She had faced this type of treatment before, and she knew she couldn't let it affect her professionalism. Yes, Mrs. Green, I'm here to help with your care today, she said calmly. Let's start with checking your blood pressure. As she worked, Mrs. Green continued to make snide comments, each one laced with subtle prejudice. Maya focused on her task, ignoring the harsh words and maintaining a gentle, steady approach. When she finally finished, Mrs. Green huffed but didn't say anything further, and Maya took that as a small win. By the afternoon, the strain of handling such difficult cases was beginning to take its toll. Maya felt emotionally drained but reminded herself that she was here to provide care, regardless of the attitudes of her patients or colleagues. She took a brief break, sipping her coffee in the quiet of the hospital's small break room. Just as she began to relax, the door swung open, and Jessica, the blonde nurse from the first day, walked in with another nurse, Rachel. They were deep in conversation, but their voices dropped as soon as they saw Maya. Jessica's gaze lingered on Maya for a moment, a barely concealed smirk on her face. Hey, Maya, Jessica said, her tone laced with false friendliness. Busy day, huh? Maya forced a smile. Yes, just keeping up with the workload. Jessica exchanged a look with Rachel. You know, it's impressive that they're giving you such challenging cases. Not everyone gets those on their first week. Rachel stifled a laugh, and Maya felt her cheeks warm. She knew they were implying that she was being given difficult patients as a test. Or worse, to see her fail. I'm happy to help however I can, Maya replied, keeping her voice steady. Jessica's smile widened. Well, just be careful. Westview has high standards, and Dr. Carlson doesn't tolerate mistakes. We wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen. The underlying threat in her words was clear, and Maya's resolve hardened. She wasn't going to let them intimidate her. Thanks for the advice, Maya replied calmly. I'll make sure I meet those standards. Jessica and Rachel exchanged another look, their smirks fading as they realized Maya wasn't going to back down. Without another word, they left the break room, leaving Maya alone. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The hostility was exhausting, but she reminded herself that this was just another challenge she needed to overcome. At the end of her shift, Maya was heading toward the exit when she noticed Thomas Yates in the lobby. He was deep in conversation with a group of hospital administrators, his expression serious. He glanced up just as she was about to leave, catching her eye, and offered a small nod of encouragement. Maya gave a subtle nod back, feeling a surge of gratitude. She didn't know how much he was aware of, But his presence alone was a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone in this battle. As she walked out into the cool evening air, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, bolstering her spirit. You've got the strength of generations behind you. Tomorrow was a new day, and Maya was ready to face it with unwavering resilience. Little did she know, events were already set in motion that would change her role at Westview in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The next morning, Maya was greeted with a surprise. Catherine Lutz, her supervisor, handed her a much lighter caseload than before. For the first time since starting at Westview, Maya's assignments seemed reasonable, almost like her colleagues. She glanced around, noticing that the other nurses were busy with their own patients, no longer smirking in her direction. As she reviewed her new assignments, she felt a momentary sense of relief. Perhaps her persistence had finally earned her some respect. She was just about to head to her first patient when she felt a presence behind her. Maya, a warm, familiar voice greeted her. She turned to see Thomas Yates standing there, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit. He looked out of place among the nurses in scrubs and doctors in lab coats. But his quiet confidence made him seem as though he belonged wherever he stood. "Mr. Yates," she said, surprised but pleased. "Good morning. What brings you to this part of the hospital?" Thomas smiled, his eyes twinkling. "I thought I'd check in on you. How's everything going?" Maya hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. She didn't want to risk exposing her struggles too openly, even if she was grateful for his support. "It's been a challenge, but I'm managing," she replied cautiously. Thomas studied her for a moment, seeming to see beyond her carefully chosen words. "You know, Maya, you're stronger than you think. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." His words were gentle but carried an unmistakable weight. She felt a surge of gratitude, her heart warming at the kindness of this unexpected ally. "Thank you, Mr. Yates. That means a lot." Thomas nodded, and then, lowering his voice, he added, "If you ever need anything, or if anyone is giving you trouble, don't hesitate to let me know." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, his stride confident and purposeful. Maya watched him go, a mixture of relief and curiosity filling her mind. She still didn't know much about him, but his support gave her strength. Perhaps there was more to him than met the eye. Later that day, Maya encountered Dr. Carlson while she was charting in the hallway. His expression was inscrutable as he approached, and she braced herself for another difficult interaction. "Nurse Daniels," he said, his tone surprisingly neutral. "I wanted to let you know that your work on Mr. Collins' case yesterday was satisfactory." Maya blinked, taken aback. She hadn't expected any form of acknowledgement, much less a faint compliment. "Thank you, Dr. Carlson," she replied, keeping her tone professional. Dr. Carlson hesitated, as if debating whether to say more. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter. "You should know that Westview is a demanding place. Not everyone is suited for it. But it seems you're determined to prove yourself." Maya met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm here to provide the best care I can, Dr. Carlson, nothing less." He held her gaze for a moment, and for the first time, she thought she saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving her with a small sense of victory. She had faced down Dr. Carlson's scrutiny without backing down, and for the first time, she felt as though she was starting to earn her place here. Over the next few days, Maya noticed a subtle shift in her environment. The nurses who had once ignored her or given her cold looks now greeted her with polite nods. Jessica, though still distant, seemed to avoid her rather than openly antagonize her. Maya took these small changes as signs that her resilience was paying off. One evening, as she was finishing up her shift, she found herself alone in the break room with Rachel, one of the nurses who had often sided with Jessica. Rachel cleared her throat awkwardly. "Maya, I just wanted to say that I think you're doing a great job." Maya looked at her, surprised. Rachel's words sounded genuine, though she seemed uncomfortable. "Thank you, Rachel. That means a lot," Maya replied warmly. Rachel shifted, glancing at the floor before looking back at Maya. "I didn't think you'd last here. Westview can be difficult, but you've proved me wrong." Maya smiled, feeling a warmth spreading through her chest. "I appreciate that, Rachel. We're all here to care for patients, and I hope we can work together." Rachel nodded, a faint smile appearing on her face. It was a small interaction, But it felt like a turning point. Slowly but surely, Maya was beginning to find allies among her colleagues. The following week, Maya was assigned to care for Mr. Peters, a high-profile patient who had recently been admitted to Westview. From what she'd read in his chart, Mr. Peters was a prominent businessman with connections in the healthcare industry. His influence meant that he was given priority treatment, with top physicians overseeing his care. When Maya entered Mr. Peters's room, she was greeted by the sight of a frail-looking man in his 70s. His face lined with age and weariness. Despite his evident physical weakness, his eyes were sharp, studying her with a shrewd gaze. "Good morning, Mr. Peters," Maya said, offering a gentle smile. "I'm Nurse Daniels, and I'll be taking care of you today." Mr. Peters nodded, his gaze lingering on her face for a moment before he spoke. "Thank you, Nurse Daniels. You seem different from the others." Maya chuckled softly. "I've heard that before." His eyes twinkled with a hint of amusement. "I like different. Different is good." As she went about her work, Maya felt Mr. Peters watching her closely. Unlike some of her previous patients, he didn't seem uncomfortable or skeptical of her abilities. In fact, he seemed intrigued, almost as though he were trying to gauge her character. "Nurse Daniels," he said, interrupting her thoughts, "tell me, how do you like working here at Westview?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "It's a challenging environment," she admitted carefully, "but I'm grateful for the opportunity." He nodded slowly, as though he understood more than she was saying. "Challenges build character, don't they? I've had my share in life. And I've learned that sometimes, to change things, you have to be willing to stand up, even when it's hard." Maya looked at him, sensing a deeper meaning in his words. "I agree, Mr. Peters. I think it's important to do what's right, even when it's not easy." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "You're a wise young woman, Nurse Daniels. I think you'll do just fine here." She finished her tasks, feeling an unexpected connection to Mr. Peters. He reminded her of her grandfather, a man who had fought his own battles and always encouraged her to stand tall. As she left his room, she felt a surge of pride. Perhaps her resilience was starting to make a difference. Later that day, Thomas Yates sought her out again. This time, his expression was more serious, his tone laced with purpose. "Maya, I wanted you to know that I've been watching how you handle yourself here," he said. "Your professionalism and resilience haven't gone unnoticed. I think it's time Westview took a closer look at how it treats its staff." Maya's heart raced. "Mr. Yates, what do you mean?" He gave her a reassuring smile. "I'm not just a visitor here, Maya. I'm on the board that oversees Westview's operations. And I believe it's time we addressed some long-standing issues within this hospital." Maya stared at him, her mind reeling. You're on the board?" Thomas nodded, his expression resolute. "Yes. And I believe that Westview needs people like you. People who are willing to stand up and do what's right. I'll be initiating an internal review of our practices, starting with how we treat our nurses." Maya felt a mix of relief and disbelief. She had never imagined that her quiet struggle would capture the attention of someone with such influence. "Thank you, Mr. Yates," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, Maya," he replied. "Just keep doing what you're doing. People are watching, and change is coming." As he walked away, Maya felt a surge of hope and determination. Her perseverance, her refusal to back down, had attracted the attention of someone with the power to make real change. And though the road ahead would be long, she knew she was not alone. For the first time since starting at Westview, Maya felt truly empowered. She had allies, she had purpose, and, most importantly, she had the strength to see this through. With Thomas Yates's support, she was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead, and to help transform Westview into a place where everyone was treated with the respect they deserved. In the days following her conversation with Thomas Yates, a subtle but unmistakable shift began to ripple through the halls of Westview Medical Center. Word had spread quietly about the internal review that was set to take place. And whispers of change began to circulate among the staff. Nurses who had once ignored Maya now acknowledged her with polite nods. And even Dr. Carlson's dismissive attitude softened, albeit slightly. Maya felt the weight of her responsibility keenly. She had become a symbol of quiet resistance, a reminder that integrity and resilience could indeed inspire change. Though her journey at Westview had been fraught with challenges, she could sense a growing respect from her colleagues, a respect she had earned through her unyielding dedication to her work and her commitment to doing what was right. One morning, Maya was preparing medication for a patient when she noticed Jessica, the blonde nurse who had been one of her harshest critics, approaching her. Jessica's expression was hesitant, a mixture of uncertainty and contrition. "Hey, Maya," Jessica said softly, her eyes downcast. Can I talk to you for a minute?" Maya turned, surprised. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Jessica shifted uncomfortably, glancing around before she spoke. "I just wanted to apologize for how I treated you when you first started here. I didn't think it mattered back then. But I was wrong." Maya felt a swell of emotions, surprise, relief, and a touch of vindication. She nodded, offering Jessica a small smile. "Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that. It wasn't easy, but I understand how things can be around here." Jessica sighed, looking genuinely remorseful. "We all got used to things the way they were, even if they weren't fair. But I see now that it wasn't right. I'm glad you stayed. Maya, you've made us all take a good look at ourselves." As Jessica walked away, Maya felt a sense of closure. She hadn't fought this battle to earn apologies, but it was gratifying to know that her resilience had made an impact. In the weeks that followed, Thomas Yates worked tirelessly with the hospital administration to implement the changes he had promised. The internal review brought to light many of the issues Maya had faced, as well as others that had gone unnoticed for far too long. Policies were revised, and new training programs on diversity and inclusion were introduced for all staff members. Dr. Carlson, who had been at the heart of much of the prejudice Maya endured, was put on probation. His behavior was scrutinized, and he was made to participate in mandatory training sessions. Though he continued to work at Westview, it was clear that his power and influence had been curtailed. Meanwhile, Thomas encouraged Maya to take an active role in the hospital's diversity committee, which had been created as part of the new reforms. Maya found herself addressing groups of nurses and doctors, sharing her experiences and discussing ways to foster a more inclusive and respectful work environment. Though public speaking had never been her strength, she was motivated by the knowledge that her story could inspire others. Months passed, and the changes at Westview began to take root. Maya was no longer the new nurse, or the outsider. She had earned her place, not just as a competent nurse but as a respected member of the Westview community. Her colleagues began to see her for her true worth, and she formed genuine friendships with some of the people who had once dismissed her. One afternoon, as Maya was finishing up her shift, she was called to a meeting in the boardroom. She arrived to find Thomas Yates waiting for her, along with the hospital administrator and a few other board members. They greeted her warmly, and she took a seat, curious about the purpose of the meeting. "Maya," Thomas began, his tone both serious and encouraging, "we wanted to speak to you about your future here at Westview." Maya's heart raced as she looked around the table, sensing the significance of the moment. "You've done more than we could have ever asked," Thomas continued. "You've shown strength, resilience, and leadership qualities that we believe would be invaluable in a more formal role. We'd like to offer you the position of Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Westview Medical Center." Maya's eyes widened in astonishment. She had never expected this, never imagined that her quiet fight for respect and fairness would lead her to such a position of influence. "We know it's a big step," Thomas said, smiling warmly, "but we believe you're more than capable of taking on this role and continuing the work you started here. You'd be working directly with the board and the administration to ensure that Westview remains a place where everyone feels valued and respected." Maya took a deep breath, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. She thought back to her first day at Westview, to the cold stares and dismissive remarks, to the moments of doubt and isolation. And yet, here she was, being offered a chance to make a lasting impact. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm honored. I never expected this, but I promise I'll do everything I can to continue building a culture of respect and inclusion here at Westview." The board members applauded, and Thomas beamed at her with pride. In that moment, Maya realized that her journey was far from over. She had a new mission, a mission to ensure that no one else would have to face the same struggles she had endured. A year later, Westview Medical Center was almost unrecognizable. The culture of exclusion and prejudice had been replaced by one of unity and respect. Staff members from diverse backgrounds felt empowered to bring their full selves to work, knowing they would be valued and supported. Maya, as the director of diversity and inclusion, had become a leader and role model, not just within Westview but in the broader healthcare community. Her story had inspired other hospitals to examine their own practices, sparking a movement that emphasized the importance of inclusivity in healthcare. One day, as she was leaving the hospital, she noticed Thomas Yates standing outside, watching the sunset. She walked over to him, smiling. "Thank you, Mr. Yates," she said. "None of this would have been possible without your support." Thomas looked at her, his eyes filled with warmth. "No, Maya, you're the one who made this happen. I just helped clear the way. Your courage and resilience changed this place, and that's something no one can ever take away." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the hospital. Maya felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment, knowing that she had turned her struggle into a legacy of change. As she walked away, she couldn't help but smile. Her journey had been difficult, but it had also been meaningful. She had found her voice, her purpose, and a place where she truly belonged. And she knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would continue to fight for a future where everyone, regardless of their background, was treated with the dignity and respect they deserved.